Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another episode of The Yakking Show. As always, we have special guests, and today will be no exception. Today, we're going to be talking about how our bodies haven't been able to keep up with modern life. But first, let's introduce co-host Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you. And thank you also very much for tuning in to our show. We so appreciate having you. And as Peter mentioned, we do have another special guest with us today. We are so privileged to welcome Jenny Powers to the show. Hello, Jenny. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing
Hi,
great.
Jenny.
It's so nice to meet you guys and be on your show. Thank you.
Now,
Very
Jenny
good.
is a writer. She's an athlete. She's a scientist who authored the book titled On the Origin of Being. There you go. Yeah. Lovely. Thank you for that. Today, she's here to yak with us about how our cultural advancements have entirely outpaced our biological evolution. I can't wait to delve into this, Jenny. So, why do you believe that humans are biologically not equipped to thrive in our current stage of technological development?
Yeah. Well, that's just a great place to start.
Mm.
Um, it's because we evolved over millions of years. From the beginnings of life, all the way through, our primate ancestors and our human ancestors. And it's taken a really long time for us to become who we are today. And for most of that time, we were hunter-gatherers for about 99% of our existence as, kind of primate people. We were hunter-gatherers. And so we spent our lives in the hunter-gatherer life. And, as our environment changed, we were able to evolve and adapt, and everything kind of, our evolution and our environment kind of went in lockstep with each other. But if you fast forward to the agricultural revolution and then to the industrial revolution, our environment started to change very, very rapidly. So rather than kind of being this flat, line changing a little bit, we started to, to see the rate of change be very, very steep. However, our bodies didn't evolve in that, in the last 200 years, we have our environment has changed, I mean, monumentally, but our bodies have not evolved and changed along with it. And so, the environment compels, our modern environment compels our behaviors to be out of alignment with what our bodies actually need. There's this mismatch between our body's needs and what our environment is providing it. And I really think that we don't even know right now what kinds of evolution our bodies are going through right now, but for sure we haven't had the time to it takes hundreds of thousands of years for things to evolve. And so we like to kind of say we're still hunter gatherers. Our software is still hunter gatherer. But it's not, the software does not run in the modern hardware. It doesn't run
Hmm,
very well.
Hmm.
okay. So, when you talk about thousands of years to evolve, here's a question for you.
Mhm.
For how many years has our appendix been falling into obsolescence? Because, and I could be wrong, but I don't recall reading about people suffering appendicitis in the Bible or in various other accounts of, say, the Egyptian or early Chinese eras. So is that a relatively modern thing, or has that been changing over thousands of years as well?
I don't really know the answer to that question. However, I do know that it's probably our lifestyle that has caused, the inflammation of that particular,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
residual appendage, I guess. So I don't know if, I'm pretty sure, in ancient times we had an appendix. I don't think it necessarily had a function way back then. I think it was already, by the time we started keeping track of it. But I don't even know. But I do think, like with a lot of things, appendicitis might be one of those diseases of modernity where,
Yeah.
things like type 2 diabetes and heart disease and cancer, obesity, all of those things that we never used to suffer from. And now we do. 90% of the time when we go to the doctor, we're seeing a doctor for something that we never used to get. And I think appendicitis might
Sure.
fall into that category.
Okay. So sorry, Kathleen, I'm going to push this one in a different direction a little bit. I
Right.
many
And
many years
actually,
ago.
Peter, I have read that although we considered it to be a superfluous appendage, They're now saying that there's a reason why we have an
Sure.
appendix and it's part of the immune system. So that's what I've
Yes.
read.
Oh,
So,
I did not know that.
I've read that too. I read that recently too. I did indeed. What I was going to ask you though is many years ago I spent a couple of years in the life assurance industry and we had a doctor on board and I raised the question as why 200 years ago did people not die of cancer, etc., heart disease and all the ailments of modernity? And his simple answer was, well, because they didn't live long enough. Poor nutrition and pneumonia and infections killed them before they got old enough to get those diseases. So is there some truth in that? I know that life expectancy's increased. I would say from reading your book that that's not entirely true.
That is not entirely true. I mean, I would agree that maybe we saw less cancer because, we didn't have the modern medicine to prevent us from dying of infections and things like that. So perhaps the invention of, our modern medicine has expanded our lifespan to the point where now we're starting to see cancer. However, if you look at hunter-gatherers who survived into the modern day, and the hunter-gatherers, they wouldn't die, they wouldn't die of diabetes or heart disease or
Oh,
cancer. I mean, they would die of infections and accidents and things like that. But
sure.
those who lived into their, late age, they had similar life expectancies as we do today. If
Hmm.
they survived, some of those early childhood things and accidents, they don't have cancer.
No,
And so I really do think, again, it's a lifestyle thing. I think, you know, uh, because of the way DNA works and how it can and how the DNA gets, mutated and can cause cancer, those things are always at play, but there are things that increase your risk.
sure.
So I think, how we lived back then, I mean, I wouldn't say cancer was non-existent. I'm sure there was cancer,
mhm.
Sure.
but it wasn't the epidemic that it is today. I feel like there's so many things um, that we are normalizing as just being part of getting old.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And like cancer and things like that are part of it. High blood pressure, high cholesterol. It's just kind of been like, oh well, yeah, well I'm getting old, and my body's doing this,
Including
and
dementia, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
dementia. Yeah. Again, the hunter-gatherer ancestors who lived into old age, sharp as tacks, their
Right.
physical and mental
Hmm.
well-being were, as well as they were when they were in their 30s, So, and that is something that's definitely changed. Our lifespan might be, in our 70s, and it actually seems to be going down right now.
Yeah.
Our health span, I mean, people are, starting in their 50s are starting to their health is starting to decline. And then so, their last decades of life might not be that vital. They might be
Mhm.
sick and might be dealing with chronic infections all the time. And so I think, those kind of chronic non-communicable diseases are really where we need to focus our attention.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's move on to diet for a moment. In your
Okay.
book on page 105, you have a diagram there that shows that the hunter-gatherers on the paleo diet were almost equally carbs, protein, and fat. But
Mhm.
we've gone away from that completely, and they didn't have sugar, as you go to some length to say that sugar is a comparatively recent addition to the
Mhm.
human diet. So what is this again part of the change of lifestyle brought about by first the agricultural, then the industrial revolution? Is that the main driver for that change in diet?
Yes, I would definitely say that. However, the where equal carbs, fats, and proteins, that is the average
Yes,
paleo
sure.
diet. So there actually really isn't a paleo diet where all of our ancestors, survived the same way. And I think, there's a lot of misconceptions about um, getting our um, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Um, okay. There's the paleo diet, there's the carnivore diet, there's,
Mm.
vegan diet, there's all of these diets, and all of them say, this is how you should actually eat. However, if you think back to before the agricultural revolution, our ancestors lived anywhere from the North Pole, to the equator and
Hmm.
everywhere in between, all of the temperate, fertile lands of this earth. And so we really ate, it depended on where we lived, it depended on what season it was. We ate what nature provided us.
Mhm.
Right.
And we were able to adapt, in the tropical places, we would eat more plants and fruits and maybe less animals. But in the northern climates, there's in the wintertime there is no plant, so we would eat a lot more animal products,
Right.
and our bodies were able to adapt either to both depending on our genetics and where we came from and things like that. So to think that there's just one uh, paleo diet is kind of misleading. I do think that what happened with the agricultural revolution is we started shifting all of our focus towards carbohydrates, towards grains, because maybe those are the things that were able to be grown and provide a lot of
Hmm.
calories,
Mhm.
and they were easy to grow. But then I think even when we really decrease the amount of diversity that we would eat, we
Mhm.
still would eat somewhat normal. We would eat the whole grain. We would eat the
Hmm.
whole food. We still ate a lot more similarly to our ancestors
Right.
than we do today. Because now, then you said the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution. The industrial revolution is the thing that really changed the way our food looked. It changed the way we made the food. Until the industrial revolution, most people made their food at home. They had the raw
Hmm.
ingredients and they'd come home and they'd make them. And then the industrial revolution started this ultra processing where you would now take the wheat and you would just take the white flour and you would make something with the white flour. You'd get rid of all the other stuff. You'd strip it of all the vitamins. You would refine oil and just take the oil. And then you would also refine the sugar and just take the pure glucose, carbohydrate, sucrose. And then you would take that sugar and the flour and the oil, and now they would make things, process things. Then they would have to add preservatives and artificial colors and artificial flavors to keep them shelf stable. And now when you look at the grocery store, most of the things they sell in the grocery store are made and packaged that way.
Hmm.
And people think that it's a convenience thing. It's definitely a convenience thing. But it's also just people not realizing that the food that is sold to them as healthy or it's just common is actually what they should be eating and is actually healthy for them.
Hmm.
Right.
So
But
there are two changes that kind of happened.
sorry, Kathleen, very quick one, and I won't take too much of Jenny's time, but there was a sociological evolution at the same time, in that this happened while people were migrating from the rural farming areas to the cities. So
Mhm.
they were getting less exercise, but they also
Mhm.
they had less time at home to prepare foods in the
Mhm.
traditional way, which drives back into your convenience. So are we not looking at a situation where the tail was wagging the dog and the dog was also wagging the tail at the same time, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, that when the Industrial Revolution occurred, it wasn't just, technology increasing and changing. It was that mass migration into cities.
Mhm.
And that caused not only a reduction of um, activity, like you said, but also a reduction of being outside in the sun, a reduction of being in
Yep.
nature. And even though all these people were coming together, I think it was started to be the reduction of community,
Hmm.
um, where you knew everybody, where you knew all of your neighbors, and you would come together and support each other and things like that.
Yeah.
So that period of time, there were a lot of nutritional circadian rhythms, our interactions with nature, and especially our work. Work became something you did outside of the home that often was backbreaking,
Sure.
and it wasn't hunting and gathering is very diverse. You get to do something different every day. You're walking, you're moving, you're running, you're squatting, and the Industrial Revolution, you would sit and do the same task over and over and over again.
That's
Mind
right.
numbing, mind numbing tasks. Um, and so
I
that
could,
changed our view of the world as well.
Right.
yes, I want to push you on work a little later, but I know Kathleen's got
Okay.
more to ask you about diet.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jenny, if we were to eat according to our biological evolution, what would our diet today look like? What should it look like?
Yeah, well, I think it would look a lot different.
Okay.
I think, the main thing, all of those people who are the proponents of the paleo diet and the carnivore diet and the vegan diet, they can't agree on what we should eat.
Right.
Because
Mhm.
humans eat a variety of things, and different people have, there's not one diet that's going to match everybody's needs. However, I do think there's one thing all of those people can agree on, and that is we shouldn't eat as much processed food as we eat. We shouldn't eat artificial fake food, the artificial flavors, artificial colors. Um, because these foods that we're eating now, we're encountering our macronutrients in packages that we've like our bodies have never seen before, in ways that our bodies have never seen before.
Hmm.
Like the sheer amount of sugar in our food that just gets immediately, absorbed into the bloodstream and causes our these spikes in sugar.
Mhm.
That is something our bodies never had to deal with before. As Peter mentioned earlier, we didn't really have pure sugar in our diet. We got all of our sugar from our food, and maybe you'd have honey or maple syrup or
Hmm.
something like that as a special treat. Um, so I really think that they'd all agree that what we need to eat more of is whole food. Hunter-gatherers ate, for their plants, they ate the skins and the husks and the seeds and the nuts and all of the fiber and all of the things in the plants were maintained. We'd process the food so it'd be easier to digest and easier to absorb, but we
Mhm.
would still eat the entire food. And then in terms of animal products, we wouldn't just eat muscle meat. We would eat connective tissue and organ meat and things like that. So by only eating certain parts of the foods that nature provides us, we're not getting that full spectrum of nutrients. And because we're not getting that full spectrum of nutrients, I think people tend to overeat because their bodies are craving something they're not getting. And so they're like, well, I need to eat more because I'm not getting what I need in my diet. So you eat more, but you're still not getting it. Um, because of the way that we process our food nowadays.
And what
Hmm.
about cooking our food? And the a lot of people eat raw food, even raw
Mhm.
meat. Believe it or not, I
Yeah.
do know people that eat raw meat.
Yep. Yep.
Um, can you tell us about that? I mean,
Yeah. Well, I mean, cooking was one of the technological advances that happened in Homo erectus
Hmm.
that actually allowed, I think it was one of the things that unlocked the ability for our brains to evolve in size. Because cooking food is a way of processing. It's a way of denaturing the proteins, cooking, making everything more available for our digestive systems to tackle it. But it also made it easier to chew, so we didn't have to spend as much time chewing. I mean, I think if you look at chimpanzees, they spend almost half their lives chewing because their foods are very, like leaves and stuff. They're very fibrous, and we had other things we needed to do. We needed to eat faster and chew slow, chew for shorter amounts of time. But also, I think cooking also allowed us to expand what we ate to maybe things that were toxic, uncooked. But once
Hmm.
you cook them, those toxins, go away. I mean, plants have defenses because they don't want to get eaten either.
Right.
And so cooking also allowed us to kind of make our foods, especially plant foods, just safer to eat. There's fewer anti-nutrients and things that might upset our stomachs and affect our guts.
Hmm.
So I think cooking is a very important part of our evolution. Um, and, I don't want people to think that, we just have to eat whole foods like, oh, okay, let's go and eat, everything off the vine. Let's not cook it. Let's not process it. When I mean we shouldn't eat processed foods, I mean the ultra processed foods that strip things away. I still think we should cook and soak and grind and things like that in our everyday food choices. Um, because those are the things that we evolved. These techniques evolved because our brains got bigger, our guts got shorter. We needed to have these processing techniques in order for ease of digestion, ease of chewing, ease of digestion, ease of absorption. So humans could do the things that they needed to do.
Hmm.
But you also make the point, Jenny, in your book, you make the point that cooking and sort of basic processing extends the life of the food and the portability of the food. I mean, it's much easier to carry a loaf of bread than loose grains of wheat, which you've still got to grind and process. So
Right.
there was some utility in cooking, both from portability and from extending the life of the food, right? Because
That's true. Yeah, it wouldn't go, I think raw meat would go bad much faster than cooked meat. Because
and
you're cooking
salted.
away and you're cooking away, all the bacteria and things like
Sure.
that could spoil it.
Yeah.
Um, so
Something else you mentioned in your book, which is a term that a lot of people are not familiar with, and I'll see if I can remember my Latin before I try and pronounce it. And that's is it eudaimonia or eudaimonia?
I would like to say eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia. Okay, fair enough.
Eudaimonia.
So tell us what you mean. I know because I've read the book, but tell our audience
Yeah.
what you mean by eudaimonia.
Yeah, well, eudaimonia is kind of an ancient, philosopher's view of the highest human good, like this
Hmm.
condition of flourishing, of living a full and deeply satisfying life. And I think, the reason why we made eudaimonia kind of this word that we latched onto as to something we want to try to attain is I think people have this expectation that we evolved to be happy. The main goal of life is to be happy. And that's really not what evolution designed
Hmm.
us to do. Evolution allowed us to flourish, allowed us to thrive, and especially it allowed us, everybody has negative things that happen in their life. There are circumstances outside of your control. This happened, millions of years ago that, um, weather or injury or sickness or whatever would still happen. But when we were thriving, when our bodies were getting what they needed, we were able to return to equilibrium and our
Hmm.
homeostasis. And so we really thought eudaimonia was kind of a way of capturing the essence of, it's not just being happy, it's not just being healthy, it's being able to do what you want to do in the way you want to do it. And then I found this quote by Richard Ryan and Edward Deci. I think they're philosophers. They said that eudaimonia is the process of fulfilling or realizing one's true nature
Hmm.
and fulfilling one's potential and living as one was inherently intended to live. And so to me, that phrase inherently intended to live screamed evolution because
Yeah,
there's nothing more inherently intended than how our bodies developed to be in equilibrium with our environment, which we clearly are not in anymore because our environment is so different.
right,
Hmm.
right, right.
Right.
So, and is the true meaning of life a quest for contentment rather than happiness, which brings in purpose and everything else?
Yeah, I think so. And part of the, the being able to thrive means that you can pursue the things you want to pursue and pursue the things that bring you contentment, pursue the things
Hmm.
that bring you just the fulfilling your life's purpose. So I think that there's happy is just one facet of maybe being in a good place. The
Sure.
capability of being happy when all of your other needs are met. But
Right.
that's not really why evolution shaped us the way that it did. It shaped us
Hmm.
so we can
Absolutely.
survive in order to reproduce.
Yeah,
But it also, in the process, made it so we maintained equilibrium. And I think maintaining equilibrium is critically important for the contentment and the purpose.
Right.
absolutely.
It's
Kathleen.
the way you're describing eudaimonia almost sounds like Maslow's theory of self-actualization.
Hmm.
Not far
Yeah.
off that,
Yeah, well,
possibly.
it's funny you would bring that up because we actually this book, this is just the first book in a series. And there's two other books coming out. And we like to think of this one as kind of like that bottom of Maslow's hierarchy,
Hmm.
like our basic
Okay.
needs, right? The book that I'm working on now that'll hopefully come out next year is kind of our social needs. I talk about
Okay.
social groups. I mean, this is important. I mean, you hear the conversation about how people are lonely, and how lonely, like social isolation and loneliness is a health issue. So we talk about social groups, we talk about child rearing, we talk about the sexes. So these are like our social needs in that second part of the pyramid. And then the top of the pyramid, our last book is going to be about our cultural needs. So we talk about the arts, we talk about rituals, we talk about celebrations, we talk about religion and spirituality. So we're kind of, like you said, we're kind of climbing up Maslow's hierarchy in our own little way. So I think that, but I also think, in our hierarchy, Maslow says that you need this before you can move to the next step up. And,
Yes.
to get to
Right.
self-actualization, you actually need all of these things. But I feel like the more I learn about how interconnected all of these behaviors are, and how interconnected, our bodies are, how we're connected to people, I feel like, like we just said, if people don't have social groups, they're not going to have health. But if people
Mhm.
have social groups, then they can have health. So I feel like there's more of a, you know, uh, diffusion of these
Mhm.
needs
Mhm.
that go up and down, not just build on each other.
Right.
If that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, it does. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So Jenny, why has our modern lifestyle created so many hormonal changes or hormonal issues with people, especially cortisol levels, actually?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would go back to the first topic in this book is sleep and circadian rhythms. I feel like our circadian rhythms are out of whack, and
Mm,
these circadian rhythms control when these hormones are made throughout the course of the day.
right.
So circadian rhythms evolved because even the earliest forms of life needed to know when to do certain things. They didn't want to replicate when the sun was out because of there might be mutation risks. Um, they needed to be at the surface when the sun was out so they could do photosynthesis. Um, but they knew at night that the nutrients were down near, farther down, and the nutrients and down in that dark areas where you could reproduce. And so even the first cells of life responded to these rhythms of light, because, the earth rotated from its very beginning. So the temporal aspect of day and night is something that all organisms have to adapt to. And humans, once we became diurnal, which means we're active during the day, our circadian rhythms get reset every morning by bright light. And then in the evenings, at least when we were evolving and we were hunter gatherers, we didn't have light after the sun went down.
Right.
And so we got this
That's
this
right.
signal to, our day is starting and our day is ending. And our bodies knew, when to produce, cortisol, to kind of wake up. We want more cortisol during the day. When to start producing melatonin, when to start making us feel sleepy so we can go to bed. But all of these hormones rely, especially, female hormones rely on cycles as well. And it's not just the cycle of every day, but the cycle of the earth as well. Um, and so I feel like these hormonal issues, the basis, I think that the very underlying reason why we're so out of whack is because we don't keep our circadian rhythms in tune with our day. We're kind of just all over the place. And our hormones, this hormone might be up while this hormone might be down, when really they both might need to be up or down at the same time, just because of the way the timing, around our circadian rhythm control goes.
Right.
Um, but I also feel like cortisol is linked to stress.
Mhm.
And I feel like, and this kind of comes to the work question. I feel like the way people approach work and how people approach life, how people approach the passage of time is so different than when
Mhm.
we were hunter gatherers. When we were hunter gatherers, we had this being in the present mindset. And it was actually critical that we were in the present because we needed to be able to survive. Like it was important for us to know what was going on around us. It was important for us to know, are we hungry? Are we thirsty? Do we need to sleep? Are we injured? Because our bodies were our survival vessels. I don't think we need our bodies anymore, to survive. We can survive never getting out of bed, because we have ways to get food and ways, different ways. But back then we needed our bodies, and we needed to know what was going on around us to be the best hunters, to be the best gatherers, to be the best leaders of your group. Um, Also, they had this thing called an immediate return economy, which
Hmm.
meant that hunter gatherers, they would go and they'd hunt or they'd gather, and they would either eat some of it, when they were out, or they'd bring all of the fruits of their labor back to the camp, and they would eat it immediately. They did have some methods of preservation, but most, these small band nomadic hunter gatherer groups ate the food pretty much immediately. They didn't store it, and they shared it. That was something that was really important for survival too. And so when we started with the agricultural revolution, and then as people moved to cities and started having these 9 to 5 jobs, we started having a delayed return economy, which is we put in the work now, and then we reap we reap the fruits of our labor next month or next season or next fall when we harvest or when we get a paycheck. And so that made us very future oriented. And I think because we're so future oriented, we start to worry, we start to think,
Right.
and then worrying about something, or trying to figure something out that you have no control over, is kind of the root cause of most of our stress, I
Hmm.
think.
Hmm.
And then, not to mention, because we're not taking care of our bodies, we're working 8, 10, 12 hours a day. We're sitting in our offices, we're not exercising our bodies. Our the stress response of our bodies for not getting its needs met, I think, is
Mhm.
also creating that cortisol. So it's
Right.
our working lifestyle, but it's also because our bodies are under stress because they're not getting what they need.
Right. Right. Well, oh my goodness, we could go on for hours in this discussion, Peter, but I see we are running out of time.
Yeah,
But
I've got a quick one for Jenny on work. I said we'd come back to
Sure.
work. So I'm looking at your book, and on page 219 you say the standard total daily energy expenditure of contemporary humans is only about 65% of that of late Paleolithic Stone Ages. And for typical Americans to approximate the expenditure of a hunter-gatherer, we would have to add a 12-mile walk to the daily activities of an average 150-pound man. So that I found highly interesting. But even more interesting was that sorry, that's on Nature, that hunter-gatherers, you mentioned that one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies, the Sand People of the Kalahari, only actually work 4 hours a day.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
found
that
that
might surprise
quite
people.
incredible. So would you like, yeah, I'm sure it will. And I've had experience. I've met some Sand People, and I've lived in that part of the world, and I know how various other tribal people have a hard life in some respects, but they don't get heart attacks. They don't get much in the way of cancer, and they certainly don't
Mhm.
have high blood pressure or suffer from stress. So there's a
Right,
lot to be said for that lifestyle. Tell
right.
our audience a little more of what you found out about that.
Yeah, well, like I was saying a little bit earlier in response to Kathleen's question, is they lived in the present. They had a very present mindset,
Hmm.
a very cyclical view of time that they'll always be taken care of because they've always been taken care of, um, and that immediate return economy. So when people think back to hunter gatherers and like, oh my gosh, this must have been the most brutal way to live. We were constantly worried about our survival. We were constantly on the verge of starvation. And looking back, there was this conference in the 1960s called Man the Hunter, where it came out that hunter gatherers were actually the original affluent society because they
Hmm.
had very few needs that were easily met, and then they had so much time for leisure and connection and storytelling and all of the cultural things that are important for survival and the social things that are important for survival. They didn't just constantly work and work and work and work. And so I think people, then these were from people who survived into the modern age, who were pushed to the extremes, right? The
Hmm.
Kalahari people, in the Kalahari Desert, that's a desert.
Hmm.
People who live in the Arctic, the Inuit, no, they were pushed to those areas because nobody else wanted them, and they were still able to kind of meet their needs. They had nutritional adequacy. There were times when they, just like everywhere, there were times of famine and times of stress, but for the most part, imagine when we were hunter-gatherers, where we lived all over the world in
Hmm.
all of these fertile places, not just these extreme places. I mean, I can imagine how not easy, but I think life was a whole lot easier than most people think it is.
Yeah,
Um,
right. No.
so and so working, we're like, oh, well, working is, we have to work hard because we've always worked hard. And working hard is, yes, they worked hard. Their hunting and gathering was not easy. They had to move their bodies, they had to expend a lot of energy. But because it was such a small part of their day, and it wasn't the central part of their day, I think the central part of their day was community.
Hmm.
It just didn't have the same effects as
Right.
and we totally approach work so differently now.
We do indeed.
Absolutely.
We do indeed.
Yeah.
We are running
Yes.
short of time.
So,
Kathleen,
Peter,
have
I
you
know
got
you have,
anything else for Jenny?
well, I think you have your burning question that you wanted to ask
I
her.
have my
Why don't we
burning
just,
question.
why don't we,
I have, let's go for it.
yeah,
So,
go ahead,
Okay.
Jenny,
start
my,
there.
my, my burning question is one that, or a variation of one that I ask every one of our expert guests, and you're certainly in that category. And that is, from all your experience and your research that you've done, is there one tip you could give our audience,
Hmm.
ordinary men and women living in the 20th century in North America and in all the developed countries in the world? Is there one tip you could give them that they could start doing today to help them live a more balanced life from what you've learned?
Yeah, well, that's such a really good question, and there's so many things I could say. But I think the thing that helped me the most when I was doing this research and writing the book was that I learned to accept the fact that me struggling in this world, me having stress, having anxiety, me having, health issues, depression, things like that. I used to think that it was my fault. It was my moral failing. It's because I couldn't do it. Um, but then I learned that all of these things, all the things I've been feeling are because the world is not allowing me to meet my needs. And so
Hmm.
it's not my fault necessarily that our culture and our society, I was just swept along and I had these reactions to it, but it wasn't because I'm a bad person or I wasn't good enough or anything like that. That shift in my mentality made it so much easier for me to change how I was living, to change, to make the small changes. Because when you're not blaming yourself, it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility, but you're not blaming yourself for your issues. It just opened the door for me to be able to make the small changes that I needed in my life that have kind of snowballed into just a healthier lifestyle, less depression, less anxiety. My body feels, I'm almost 50 and my body feels better than it did when I was 25, because of these lifestyle changes. And I was not able to make those lifestyle changes until I had that shift in my mind.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, People who are struggling not because they're bad or it's their fault and, they're more immoral somehow. It's because we are all living in an environment that nowhere near enough meets our needs, our biological evolved needs.
Hmm.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't want to delay things, but I would agree with you 100% from my own personal experience, which some people have heard and some haven't. I
Mhm.
agree with you 100%. Last one for me is to thank you, Jenny, for being on the show. Thank our audience. Thank you all for listening and watching. Uh, and to let you know, Kathleen's got something new to tell you about a community that we're starting. She'll mention that in a moment. And to make sure you don't miss out on future guests like we've had Jenny today, hop onto our website, theyakingshow.com, and sign up for our newsletter. We'll only send you one email a week, just tell you who's on this week and who's coming next week. That's it from me. Thanks, Jenny. Bye-bye, everyone. Back to you, Kathleen.
Thanks, Jenny. That was so enlightening. I appreciated having you.
Mm.
But before I
You're
let you
welcome. Thank
go,
you so much.
please tell us how people can contact you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, our website is www.ontheoriginofbeing.com. That has a link to where you can buy the book. It has some excerpts from the book. It has all the podcasts we've been on. So that's a good place to start.
Okay.
My email address is just info@ontheoriginofbeing.com if you wanted to contact me directly. But then I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, and those are @ontheoriginofbeing.
Okay.
So, um, yeah, I'm on all those places, and would love for people to engage if they feel like it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all again for tuning into our show. If anyone is interested in being a guest on our show, please visit us at theyakingshow.com. All you need to do is click on the contacts tab where you will find a short application form. And as Peter mentioned, I do have another special announcement to make, and that is that we've just created a Facebook group for all of our wonderful audience as well as our guests to be able to engage with one another. And that Facebook group is called the Yakking Show Community Forum. So hopefully we will have a link, Peter, to that
Mhm.
below this video, and we hope that you join us there. And until next time, did you have anything else to add, Peter?
No, just thanks again. And I found the book absolutely
Oh, yeah, there you
fascinating.
go.
Uh, Quite incredible. I could talk to Jenny for another 2 hours, honestly, with what I picked up in this book. So thank you, Jenny.
Well,
Thank
once
you so
again,
much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
thank you, Jenny, and thank you all so very much. Until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.